spend most of my waking hours caring for my elderly grandma, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease, which has taken increasingly more and more from her. I don't do anything requiring advanced medical knowledge. A nurse comes by the house twice a week to help with that sort of stuff. I have zero medical training other than a CPR course I took a few months ago in case of an emergency. But something tells me that I am already forgetting the basics with each passing day. I don't mind taking care of her. My grandma took me in when I was 11 years old after my father and mother split. Neither of them really wanted a child. That was evident from the beginning. I think my mother loved me, but she was never fit to raise a kid. She knew it. My father, on the other hand, was never fit to be around children, let alone take care of one himself. He was always in and out of jail. Before my grandmother took me in, my fondest childhood memories were when my dad was doing time. Things weren't so bad when it was just my mother and me, but whenever he returned from his imprisonment, things would always end falling apart again. When my parents finally did divorce, I was about as dejected as a child could be. The bright beam of childhood innocence had long since faded from my eyes. That all changed when I went to live with my grandma. Her house was clean and big and had a lot of land to play on. I had a room to myself and more than two changes of clothes. I thought we must have been rich. Raising me increased her financial burden, but she never let it show on her face. That woman always had a smile on. I wish that smile would come back. Ever since the disease started taking a firm hold on her, she mostly just stares. She allows me to take care of her on the good days, and we spend quality time enjoying novels and her black and white TV shows. On the bad days, though, she won't let me help at all. I don't quite understand what sets her off, but some days she wakes up paranoid and scared. Day 1, Sunday. My alarm went off at 5:55 a.m. What the hell? I thought. I always set my alarm for 9 a.m. Although many old people enjoy waking up earlier than the sun, my grandma will sleep all day if I let her. I usually start my day at 9, get myself ready, make her breakfast, and then get grandma out of the bed around 10. So why was my alarm going off at 5:55? I turned it off and rolled over, trying to fall back asleep. But before I could, I heard a crash from upstairs. I live in the basement and Grandma lives in the master bedroom on the main floor. I rushed out of my bedroom and up the stairs as quickly as possible. Was Grandma hurt? Did she fall? What was she doing out of bed? My mind was racing. When I reached the top of the stairs, I expected to see my grandmother somewhere on the floor, but instead I saw an empty living room. The sun hadn't come up yet, making the room barely visible. I peered into master bedroom and found Grandma still fast asleep. I closed the door slowly, trying not to wake her up. With Grandma safe in her room, I decided to check the house to see if I could locate the source of the crashing sound. The kitchen looked normal except for a knife in the sink, which I was pretty sure I had cleaned and put away the night before. Next, I checked the living room and found a book on the floor. I keep the house pretty tidy so that Grandma doesn't tip over anything, so it was definitely odd to find a book in the middle of the room. I picked it up and opened it. It was a scrapbook, one of the many my grandmother had put together over the years. This one mainly consisted of photos of my mother when she was young. Closing the book, I walked a few feet to the bookshelf and returned it, where dust had revealed its usual resting place. I still felt a little groggy, and with my tired mind, I rationalized that my grandma had been looking at it earlier and left it on the floor without me realizing it. That's the thing about the human mind. We will do anything to rationalize the unexplainable. Remembering it was still early and I had about 3 hours before I needed to get on with my day, I snuck out of the house for a quick run. I don't typically leave my grandmother unattended, but she wouldn't wake up for a while, and it was nice to get some time to myself. I returned to the house half an hour later. Stepping into the bathroom, I got a text from my girlfriend, Jane. She works at a bakery and always texts me when she heads off to work, though I usually don't reply for a couple of hours because, like I said before, I'm never up this early. The text read, "Good morning, Paul. I'm leaving for work, but maybe I can swing by later and hang out for a bit." I smiled and decided I'd surprise her by texting back immediately, "Have fun at work. I love you." "Wow, you're up early," she replied. "Yeah, I got woken up by a loud noise and decided to get a jump start on my day. I left out the part about my alarm going off 3 hours early." When it was time to wake up Grandma, I went to her bedroom softly and turned on the light, but to my surprise, Grandma was already awake. She sat at the foot of her bed, staring at me, not with her usual blank stare, but a fearful one. "Hey, Grandma, what's wrong?" I asked. She didn't reply. She just kept staring at me. I decided to give her some privacy after making sure she was safe. I went to the kitchen to make some breakfast. As I glanced into the sink, ready to wash the knife I had forgotten about the night before, it was gone. I figured I was tired when I noticed it earlier, and I was probably mistaken. There is a window above the kitchen sink, which gives a beautiful view of the lawn. As I stared out, a blue bird flew by and rested on the back porch. The beautiful bird looked almost out of place in our little backyard. I had never seen a bird like it in our area. When I turned around, I almost jumped out of my skin to see my grandma an inch from my face. "Geez, Grandma!" My fear quickly turned into laughter as I chuckled. "Granny, you nearly scared me," as I chuckled. "Are you feeling any better?" She still had the scared and angry look at her face. It was almost as if... "Hey, Grandma," I said nervously. "You know who am I?" "It's me, Paul, your grandson." Quietly, she said without taking her eyes off me, "There is someone in the house." A feeling of awful guilt spread over me as I told her, "No, Grandma, you know me? I live here with you, remember?" Her anger turned into disappointment. She leaned closer to my face and in a hushed tone whispered, "No, Paul, I know who you are. I'm telling you that there is someone in our house." My heart sank and the guilty pit in my stomach became a sinkhole of fear. "Where, Grandma? Where did you see this person? My God, are they still here?" I instantly believed her, as I always have, but then for a moment I thought, is this the disease? Is she seeing things now? I don't remember the doctor saying anything about hallucinations. I pushed the thoughts out of my head. I reached for my phone to dial 911, but Grandma put her hand on mine before I could unlock it. "He's in my room," she said it almost as if it was an afterthought. My heart raced, and without thinking, I picked her up and shuffled towards the front door. Once outside, I sat her on the porch bench. "Stay here," I said. She wasn't looking me in the eyes. I rushed back into the house, to her bedroom. The door was shut. I went to reach for the handle, but I stopped. Adrenaline had gotten me this far, but it seemed to run dry when it came to investigate. What would I even do if I found someone in there? I thought, but I needed to make sure that we were safe. I slowly turned the knob and pushed my way inside. Everything looked normal, other than a bit of clutter. Hadn't I picked up her room last night before I went to bed? I checked everywhere, but there was no sign of anyone. I felt relieved and almost smiled at how worked up I had been. That feeling soon left me as I remembered the master bathroom with its door still shut. I flung the door open, but what I saw didn't scare me. It was confusing. The walls, the mirror, the floor, all of it. It was all covered in a black sludge. The smell reminded me of many hot summer days I spent walking the empty road as a kid. It was the smell of tar and tobacco. After standing in shock for what must have been a few minutes, I checked the rest of the house but found nothing. I walked outside to find my grandma still on the bench. Her attention had turned to a small pile of ants on the concrete. "Hey, Grandma, I checked the house. There's no one there." She didn't reply. "Did something happen in the bathroom? What is all that stuff?" Still no reply. I wasn't totally convinced that there had been an intruder, but I also wasn't totally convinced my grandma had made the mess herself. The rest of the day passed by quickly. Grandma hadn't said a word to me since the incident. But honestly, I didn't really have time for conversation anyway. Cleaning the sludge was nearly impossible. It took me well into the afternoon to clear away the black stain. The tar was warm to the touch initially, but soon completely dried, making it hard and resistant to my efforts. I didn't even realize the time it was when I heard a knock at the door. Jane! I ran to the door and opened it to see her face beaming at me. Jane, I'm so sorry, I forgot you were coming over. She looked disappointed. Oh, sorry? Do you want me to leave? I should have texted to remind you I was coming. No, please come in. I'm sorry. I just feel bad that I haven't showered or made dinner or anything. I have been busy today. How's Grandma doing? She asked. It's been a bad day for her today. She knew what I meant. I had often confided in her about Grandma's previous bad days. She knew from interacting with Grandma how quiet and off she could seem when her mind wasn't at its best. "Ah, Granny," she said, turning a sympathetic face to Grandma. She really did love my grandma. We ordered Chinese food, and I told Jane about the day's events. That's so weird, she said, between bites of orange chicken. Where do you think she got the black stuff? I don't know. I'm not even 100% sure it was her. I mean, who knows? Maybe someone was in our house. I did notice a few things out of place. We sat silently for a few seconds. We turned our attention to the black and white film we had put on for Grandma, and soon the night started to feel like any other. When the movie ended, I tucked Grandma into bed. Jen and I turned on a show with an actual color and cuddled on the couch. Day 2, Monday. My alarm woke me up at 5:55 a.m. again. I looked at my phone, puzzled that it had happened twice. Before I had time to go back to bed, a loud bang from upstairs startled me. I was on my feet in an instant. This sound was much louder than the one before. I barreled up the stairs and peered into my grandma's room. She was asleep. Stepping back into the living room, I found the same scrapbook on the floor. I started turning on all the lights. Once the room was well lit, I opened the scrapbook. A sinister feeling crept into my bones as I flipped through the pages, page after page. Every picture that included my mother had been ruined, her face cut from each photo. I called the police, and the operative said they would be there as soon as possible. I was convinced that there had been someone in the house. While waiting for the police, I woke up Grandma and walked her out to my car, where she sat while I looked at the house over and over again. In the 6 minutes it took for the police to arrive, I noticed a drawer open in the kitchen. I also found more black goo in the garage. The police walked through the house, checking every place a person could hide. They didn't find anyone, and there was no evidence of forced entry. Sounds like someone might be looking to hurt your mom, seeing as her face was cut off all the pictures, said the officer. Well, if someone had it out for her, they had the wrong house. We haven't seen her in nearly 17 years, I replied. The officers offered to check up on us later tonight to make sure there wasn't anyone lurking around the property, and said to call again if there was any further disturbances. Thanks, officer, I said. I ushered Grandma back into the house as they pulled out of the driveway. You all right, Grandma? I asked. No response. We stepped into the living room, and I was helping her sit on the couch when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to face the kitchen window. The same blue bird from the other day was staring right at me. The bird was so beautiful, but looking at it, I couldn't help but feel like I was in some sort of danger, like a bad omen. It continued to stare for a few moments and then flew away. The day dragged on. Grandma hadn't said a word. Worse, she hadn't even looked me in the eyes. I was worried. The sun dipped over the horizon, and suddenly it was night. Time to put Grandma to bed. As I helped her get comfortable, she looked at me. It was a welcome surprise, but I smiled at her, but she didn't smile back. She only whispered the words, "Someone is in the kitchen." Ice went down my spine. What, Grandma? We were both just in there. I didn't see anybody. She looked terrified. Obviously, my words were of no comfort to her. She just repeated, "In the kitchen, in the kitchen." kitchen. Then she rolled over, closed her eyes, and stopped speaking. She was really starting to make me worried, and I really couldn't decide whether to believe her or not. I left the room and headed for the kitchen. Upon arrival, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary right away, other than the drawer with bags and wraps. It was open again, and I turned to walk out and turn the light off, but the room didn't get dark. I flicked the switch on and off, but the room remained illuminated. In fact, it was getting brighter. Panicked, I did the first thing that came to my mind and reached out for the big knife in the knife block, but I froze when I noticed the knife block was empty. Sweat washed over me, and I saw all the knives in the sink. The room continued to illuminate brighter and brighter as I dashed for a knife and cut myself on one of the smaller blades before finally grabbing hold of the bread knife. My attention briefly turned to my bloody hand as I attempted to wrap a rag around the wound. Just then, the room went completely quiet, and I saw it. A large figure, maybe 8 feet tall. The creature was completely naked except for a plastic film, plastic wrap covering it from head to toe. The light emanating from the figure seemed to give me tunnel vision, blurring my surroundings. I couldn't make out the face as it was completely masked in the plastic wrapping, but there was a protrusion where the nose should have been, and a protrusion where the mouth should have been. Petrified, I felt my blood run cold. I was so scared that I was physically unable to move. The the dread filled me like molasses in a glass, slowing my thoughts. I dropped the knife, which crashed to the floor with a metallic clang. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like stone. I started to panic. I stared in horror at the bright monster, and just when I thought it might attack, it began to speak. "Fear not, sweet boy." Its voice sounded frail and weak, as if trying to convince me I was safe. It reminded me how an old person might talk to a child, almost mimicking their innocent tone. It continued to speak to me. "Sweet Paul, sweet Paul." "Who are you?" I managed to say in a shaky voice. "Sweet Paul, I am your guardian angel, your guide in the darkness, your friend from above." I wasn't convinced. An angel? This thing looked demonic. It was the stuff of nightmares. "Okay, well, I'm good. Actually, I don't need the guardian angel." The angel began breathing heavily. In a much deeper voice than before, it said, "Yes, my sweet boy, you do." Just then, the knives in the sink flew straight up in the air and stuck into the ceiling. The noise startled me, and I turned to see the knives dangling. With my eyes briefly off the creature, I immediately heard footsteps running towards me. I screamed and turned back to face the monster, raising my arms to shield my face, but I braced for impact, but it never came. I opened my eyes to a dark, empty room. It was gone, and I was all alone. I quickly flipped on the light and grabbed my phone to call Jane. It went straight to voicemail. She must have been asleep, with no one to talk to. I placed an arm around my wound, and I looked at it. I paced around my room until exhaustion took its toll, and I went to bed. Day 3, Tuesday. The next day, my alarm went off at 5:55 a.m. again. This time, I was ready for it. I bolted up the stairs before any noise alerted me to an action, hoping to catch the creature who had been terrorizing us. I started my investigation by checking on Grandma asleep. Good, I thought. As I shut the door and turned my attention to the rest of the house, the first thing I noticed was the scrapbook on the floor, with its pages torn out and strewn across the floor. I needed to clean that up before my grandma had the chance to see the pitiful state of her treasured photo album, but that would have to wait until I scoured the rest of the house. Next, I went to the kitchen. Nothing looked too out of the ordinary, but I noticed that one knife remained stuck to the ceiling, while the rest had fallen to the ground. I was about to check the rest of the house when I heard a loud slam coming from the basement. The noise was louder than the previous days, and I was sure it had woken Grandma, so I decided to check on her before investigating again. Just as I suspected, Grandma was sitting up straight when I walked through the door. She hadn't turned to look at me when I walked in. "You okay, Grandma?" I asked her. I wasn't expecting a response since she had been nearly mute the past few days. Despite my expectations, she answered immediately. It's okay, Paul. They can't hurt us today. Hank will protect us. Hank was the name of my grandfather, who had been dead for over 20 years. I didn't have the heart to remind her of his passing, so I said nothing and walked towards the stairs. As I took the first step down, the loud banging noise repeated, sending a chill down my spine. I went to take the next step, but stood frozen for several seconds. I managed to break through my terror and continue my plunge to the basement. Other than a repeating noise, there was no noise in the house. A guest bedroom and a family room which had slowly morphed into my personal man cave over the years. The sound happened a third time, and it was clearly coming from the family room. I peeked my head through the door, but quickly shot back behind the wall. I had expected to see my not-so-angelic guardian angel, but crouched in the middle of the room was something far, far worse. It was bigger than my angel, maybe 10 feet tall. It had to slouch just to fit in the room. Instead of light, the creature emanated a blinding darkness which seemed to be battling for space with the soft light of the room coming through the window. It had hands where it were severely large for its body and with long bony fingers. The most notable characteristics of the monster was that was covering its body was a wrap from head to toe. The creature was soaked in hot black sludge which dripped down the floor. The chemical smell was overwhelmingly potent and found myself struggling not to gag as I sat still and listened to the beast breathe. I shifted my weight, preparing to take another look. Before I could peer around the corner, the monster screamed, which sounded like the mix of a man and a dog. I booked to the staircase, looking behind me, only to watch as the creature tumbled toward me with impressive speed. I reached the top of the stairs and almost ran for the front door when I remembered Grandma, who was still in her room. Thinking quickly, I leaped behind the island counter in the middle of the kitchen and hid myself, trying to make as little sound as I could. I heard the tall monster reach the top of the stairs and pause. Thankfully, it didn't know where I was, but soon began searching for me. I caught a glimpse of it as its back was turned to me, and I noticed it was carrying something large. Is that a rock? I thought to myself. Then I recognized it. The thing was carrying my rock from underneath my coffee table. What on earth does it want with that? I turned my attention back to my hiding place and scanned for weapons. As my eyes darted around the kitchen, I became transfixed on the window, or rather what was behind the window, a little blue bird. Just then, I heard something crash against the floor, and I spun around. The creature was gone, and my rug lay rolled up in the living room. The rest of the day felt foggy. My head was aching, and no amount of aspirin could dull the throbbing. Grandma stayed in her room, not letting me in other than to bring her meals and make sure she was taking her medication. By the time night rolled around, I was ready to call it a day, but Jane came over for dinner and her understanding energy started to rub off on me. So what did you do today? Find any more objects in weird places? She asked innocently. I had almost forgotten that I hadn't told her about the bizarre monsters I had been seeing. I thought I could keep it to myself, but I could never lie to her. We had been friends since elementary school and together since high school. She was the one person on earth I expected to believe my story. So I told her about the monster, the tar monster, and the angelic plastic guardian from the night before. When I finished, she stared at me with her jaw open. Oh my goodness, Paul. This is just like that show, Ghost Adventure or something. She had a huge smile on her face, which was not the reaction I was expecting. Maybe not just like the Ghost Adventures, but this is pretty freaky, I said. We should like set up some cameras and catch them the next time they appear. We could be like famous or something. She really did seem genuinely excited about the idea. I would like to see how excited you are when they appear in your kitchen. I shot back now, smiling myself. It's okay, pal. I stayed the night to protect you, she offered. Don't you work in the morning? I asked. Nope. We are closed tomorrow, silly. I didn't say it, but it was actually extremely relieving to not have to spend the night alone. I started to get seriously terrified of my own home. Well, it's settled then, I told her. You can deal with the big evil monsters, and I will get some much needed beauty sleep. The rest of the night actually felt normal. We watched a horror movie at Jane's request. What is it with her and this spooky shit? I went to bed. I had this really weird dream that night about my mom. In the dream, I was young, maybe 7 or 8, and was helping her mop the kitchen. She showed me how to fill up the bucket with the water and how much cleaner to pour in it. She handed me the mop and said, "Give it a try." I was so eager to help, I nearly tripped over the mop as I swished it from side to side. We were cleaning up something wet. I figured maybe I had spilled some grape soda again, and then you dip it into the water again, she told me. I plunged the mop into the bucket, and I was about to pull it back out when I saw the water turn a light red color. Confused, I looked at the ground I had just mopped and was horrified to see that the liquid I had been smearing around the towel was thick, shimmering pool of blood. I screamed. I looked up at my mother for her to comfort me, but I stumbled backwards over the bucket when I saw her. As I lay soaked in soap water and blood, I watched my mom stare at me with the biggest smile. Her head was bleeding. I shot up in bed, free from the nightmare. I must have been gasping for air because Jane sat up as well and stared, rubbing my back. "Hey, hey, hey, what's the matter?" she asked. Catching my breath, I started to laugh a bit as I said, "I just had the weirdest, most morbid dream of my life. I was a kid and my mom was letting me help with her chores, but she was bleeding everywhere and I think that she was going to die." Jane continued to comfort me and said, "That's weird. Your mom is fine though, right? I mean, as far as we know." To be honest, I wasn't sure how my mom was doing. The last time I saw her was just before she went to rehab when I was 8. From that time forward, I only communicated with her through letters. When I was 13, the letters stopped. "I'm sure she's okay," I said, more to reassure myself than Jane. We went back to sleep and I didn't have any more weird dreams that night. Day 4, Wednesday. My alarm woke Jane and me up at 5:55 a.m. again. "Why did you set the alarm so early?" she asked, pulling a pillow over her ears. I turned off the alarm. "I didn't set it. It's just been doing that. There should be a loud sound, kind of like a banging in a minute or two." We sat in complete silence, waiting for something to happen. About 10 minutes passed, and I started to feel relieved. Maybe nothing will happen today, I said. Moments later, we heard a scream coming from upstairs. "Granny!" Jane shouted as the two of us sprang into action. I stumbled on the stairs, but recovered quickly as I bear-clawed the rest of my way up with tremendous speed. When I reached Grandma's door, Jane was close behind me. I burst through the door and looked side to side for my grandmother. She was gone. I ran into her bed and checked underneath, but there was nothing. We searched everywhere. The closet, the bathroom, the kitchen, everywhere. She had just vanished. "Call the police. I'm going to drive around the neighborhood in case she left the house," I shouted. Jane began dialing 911 and I heard her give the operator the address as I left the house. I spent the next 15 minutes driving up, down, and up the roads close to home. But there was no sign of Grandma. Jane texted me that the police had arrived and I returned to the house. The police rechecked the house and talked to someone on the radio about having all officers on the lookout for a wandering and confused elderly woman. I explained to them that her screams sounded frightened and I thought she might have been taken. They listened to me explain as much as I could without making me sound crazy. And when I had finished my story, they told me the most likely scenario was that she had left the house on her own. I didn't try to argue. I knew how my story must have sounded, and there was nothing I could say to get them to believe me. On top of that, I wanted them to be correct. If Grandma were out on her own, as dangerous as that would be, it would be better than being taken away by something or someone. The officers left the house to search for Grandma. While they drove away, I held Jane, who was sobbing, into my shirt. The rest of the day, Jane and I drove around town looking for her. When we would get tired of driving, we would go back to the house and search there again. Repeated the cycle until it started to get dark, and when we decided to try it again the next day and allow the police to do their jobs. We remained in contact with them throughout the day, but they turned up nothing. I was devastated. I felt like crying, but I had held back the tears all day long. I was not afraid to cry in front of Jane, but I felt like I needed all my energy to go toward finding Grandma. I couldn't waste any time crying. While at home, Jane passed out on the couch, exhausted from emotionally taxing day. I stayed up on my computer creating a flyer to put up around the town the next day. I kept my phone ringer on so I would get all the updates from the police. Eventually, I started to drift off while sitting upright on my chair. I felt the world getting fuzzy and fuzzier as my eyelids slowly fell, fluttering back open a few times and falling again. I was seconds away from a total unconsciousness when I heard a voice whisper, "You don't remember, B? Do you, sweet boy?" I jolted awake to find the plastic angel peering its head from behind the sofa that Jane was sleeping on, its long fingers wrapped around the back of the couch. Jane? I managed to squeak out. Jane, wake up! She didn't move. I knew she was asleep, much deep of asleep. But come on, Jane, you need to remember. The angel's voice was shrill, like nails on chalkboard. Remember what? I asked. You need to remember, Paul. You were young. Your mind was easily molded, but it was not the truth. The angel began inching towards me and it continued. You need to see what you were forced to forget. When the angel had reached my chair, it slowly lifted its pointer finger, which began to glow brighter than any light I have ever seen. The finger landed on my forehead and I fell into a deep sleep. 17 years ago, when I was 8, my parents fought a lot. One summer, when my father finished his third stint in prison, he returned home to find that my mother was not conducting their finances the way that she had before. She spent more money on groceries and less on pills. She bought me new shoes, even took me to movies once. This caused them to fight to no end. Whenever they would argue, I would sit outside our mobile home on a concrete slab and wait for it to be over. One day I sat it out in the sweltering sun and played with a group of ants that found a small splash of grape soda I had spilled. I let them crawl on my fingers and then back to the hot ground. The air was wet, making it hard to swallow. The yelling from inside became unbearably loud, so I stood up and began walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to be somewhere safe. After about a half a mile, I was wandering aimlessly. I saw a girl sitting on a tire swing that hung from a solitary tree. I tried not to make eye contact because I was 8 and girls were icky. As I was walking past, she called out to me, "Hey kid." Shocked, I turned to see her with a warm smile on her face from ear to ear. "Hi," I replied sheepishly. "Could you push me? I'm not very good at pumping my legs." I felt a little weird about it, but I didn't really have anything else to do. I decided to comply since pushing a girl on a string seemed more interesting than walking. "What's your name?" she asked. "Paul," I said, warming up to her more and more by the minute. "What's your name?" I asked. "Jane," she said matter-of-factly. We played for around an hour, and I then decided it was probably time to head back home. My parents didn't like when I was gone for too long. After that day, every time my parents would fight, I would walk over to Jane's house and we would push each other on the old tire string. On one particular rainy day, my parents began to get into another one of their heated arguments. I put on my rain boots and was about to go to my room to get my coat in hopes I could meet up with Jane. Maybe we could find some big puddles to splash in, as I thought. As I trotted over to my bedroom, I heard my mother scream. It wasn't a scream out of anger. That wouldn't have been novel enough to catch my attention. It was a scream of pain. I ran to the kitchen where I saw my mother holding her face, which was quickly turning a dark color. My father was standing over her with a rage in his eyes. Fear held me in its grasp. I wanted to turn, to run, but the fear held me in space, staring at the violent scene before me, wide eyes filling with tears. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and then back at my mother. My dad looked at me and shouted, "You see, Paul? This is what happens when you step out of the line." I was paralyzed. I wanted to help my mother. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay. I wanted to hurt my father for hurting her. But most of all, I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream so badly, but I couldn't. All that came out of was a sob. My crying only made my father angrier. He took a step towards me, but my mother shot up off the ground like a lightning and lashed at him, screaming, "Stay away from him, you fucking monster!" My dad shoved her off and went to hit her again, but my lungs finally released the death grip they had held on my oxygen, and I screamed, "Stop it!" This caught him off guard, and as he turned to face me, my mother jumped to her feet once more and rushed to the knife block, pulling out the biggest one. Before she had a chance to use it, my father grabbed her from behind and threw her down. Her head slammed to the counter on her way to the floor. With a thud, she landed on the ground. She lay motionless as a pool of blood formed around her. "Oh shit!" my dad yelled. He stared. He stared at my mom's lifeless body. He started grabbing at her head in a feeble attempt to stop the bleeding. "No, no, 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 fuck, no, no." His voice trailed off. As I watched this unfold, my vision became blurry and my peripheral vision began fading out, locking my gaze on the crimson stream flooding from my mom's skull. We sat in silence. Minutes passed, then an hour. I didn't dare say a word. I couldn't. There was nothing in my 80-year-old mind that could understand what happened. My mother never woke up. When my father finally composed himself, he stood up off the ground and began rummaging through drawers in the kitchen. After a minute of searching, he found what he was looking for. He dropped to his knees next to my mother with a package of plastic wrap in his hands. He lifted her head a few inches and carefully wrapped the plastic body all over her head and body. He was thorough, making sure the blood couldn't continue to drip from her wound. Once he was satisfied with his patch-up job, my mother looked like a shiny mannequin. He laid her head back down and left the room, returning a moment later with the rock from under our coffee table. He wrapped her tightly. He snapped at me to grab the mop, and soon I was cleaning the kitchen floor. I had to stand up to avoid him as he dragged my mother out of the kitchen and through the front door. He lashed the deadbolt behind him, and a moment later I heard the ignition of his truck. Peering out the window, I watched him drive away. He didn't come back for several hours. The whole time he was gone, I stayed in my corner of the kitchen, curled into a ball. The evening turned into night. Eventually I fell asleep on the kitchen tile. I woke around the time he returned. I looked at the digital clock and the stove. It was 5:55 a.m. He was sweaty and tired and wore a look of sadness on his face. He took a shower, got dressed, and then called me into the living room. I did as I was told and shuffled my little feet until I found myself sitting on the couch next to the man who had raised me. He was quiet for a while and seemed to be lost in thought. He looked at me and said, "Polly, you know Mommy had to go away for a little bit, right?" I looked at him confused. He continued, "Mom has been fighting some tough battles these past few months. She used a lot of drugs, you know. She uses drugs, don't you?" I nodded. I had seen her on many occasions high as she would lay in bed for what seemed like days. I said nothing as the thought of my mom using drugs passed my mind. I was about to say Mom had to go somewhere to get help. And Dad continued, "Yes, Mom had to go somewhere to get help. A rehab center. It's kind of like a hospital." The more he spoke, the less I understood. "But she was bleeding. Where did you take her?" I felt more lost than ever. "No, Paul," he said sternly. "She wasn't bleeding." But," I stammered. "No, Paul, no," he shouted. "Mom is fine. She just had to go away for a while." He sounded really frustrated. "She had to go away," he reiterated. "So when someone asks you where your mom is, what do you tell them?" He was looking at me right in the eyes now. I thought for a minute. "I tell them she had to go away for a while." "Yes, yes, Paul, that's right." He buried my face in his chest as he forced an embrace. "That's right, my son. Mom just had to go away for a little while, and that's all we know." When he left the room, I sat there a little longer before standing shakily to my feet and walking out the front door. I sat on the wet concrete slab, unsure if I should cry. I was so confused. I really wasn't sure what had happened, but I wanted to believe my father. If he were telling the truth, then my mom could be okay. She might return. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still loomed overhead. Just then I heard a quiet tap on the concrete beside me. I turned my head to see the most beautiful blue bird. I awoke drenched in sweat. I was in the living room chair where I had been before the angel had touched me. Jane was still curled up on the couch. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was 5:50 a.m. Day 5, Thursday. When my alarm went off at 5:55 a.m., I silenced it and woke Jane up. "What's going on?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "We have to hide. This is it when it always happens." Confused but terrified, she sat up and began looking around. Where should we hide? She was starting to realize what danger we were in and started to panic. I wanted to comfort her, but to be honest, I was scared shitless myself. "The pantry!" I exclaimed, pointing towards the kitchen. We scrambled to the door and hid inside just before a booming sound stopped us in our tracks. Just as we closed the door, we heard a blood-curdling roar coming from the basement. We held each other tightly, neither of us daring to breathe too loudly. Pounding footsteps pounded up the stair as the hate-filled roars continued. Through the slits in the pantry door, I could see a large black personage launch itself from the top step into the living room. Black sludge splashed onto all surface as it frantically searched around the room. It carried my rolled-up rug from the basement. This time it looked a little thicker. The creature slammed the rug onto the floor of the living room, and with a scream it fell down the stairs on all fours. After a few moments, we ventured outside the pantry. We couldn't hear the monster anymore, and we panted back the oxygen we had lost while holding our breath. Frantically, I ran into the living room. I needed to see what was inside the rug. Something in my gut told me it would be the decayed body of my mother, but when I opened it up, she wasn't inside. Instead was my sweet grandma, still and cold. I let out a sob. Tears streamed from my face and I began performing CPR, 30 chest compressions and 2 breaths. I remembered, but it wasn't enough. My grandmother, the woman who had raised me for most of my life, the only caretaker who ever gave a damn about me, lay dead on the floor of our living room. At the funeral a few days later, Jane held me as we cried together. I was a mess. I had never felt the sting of death quite like this before. I had been to funerals before, and they were sad. But this one, no, this one was different. Death didn't just take a life from me, it took my whole heart. Could I really say that death took my grandmother? Sure, death might have been waiting in the wings, but what took her was my past. If I had remembered what my father had done to my mother sooner, would all of this would have been bypassed? Did it take the loss of my dear mother figure to deliver the truth? These are questions that I don't think I will ever be able to answer. Everything ended the night my grandmother was taken from me. As they raided the casket to be lowered, a small blue bird perched near the head of his grave. It seemed to bow its head in reverence. Walking back to our car, Jane broke the silence. "I haven't smoked in years, but I think I need a cigarette today." "You want some too?" She pulled out a pack that I didn't even know she bought. "No thanks," I replied. "My dad used to smoke 2 packs a day." Thank you everyone for watching this video until the end, and hope you enjoyed this story as much as I did. This story was brought to you from foreign underscore yesterday underscore 49. Make sure you go give him his flowers. He is an amazing writer, and this has been an honor to narrate this story. The story is very rich and very telling, quite different from my usual narrations on horror community and horror stories, but this is a very impactful story. And if you have any criticism, any recommendations, any kind of stories you want me to narrate, or any other suggestions for the channel, feel free to put it in the description. And make sure you drop a follow in order to support me. And I will try to post at least 1 or 2 videos per week. I have been out for a while due to my health issues and some financial issues, but I'm trying to be consistent because I enjoy this and I want to bring joy and fear to everyone that is willing to support. And make sure you stay hydrated and eat well. And until next time, this is Dr. Lucius out.